I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed's Sunday feature interview. I'll be back again tomorrow with another weekday episode of Fear and Greed, the normal mix of business news and interviews that sets you up for a successful day. In the meantime, enjoy our Sunday feature interview. In the future, when we look back on 2020, one of the many changes we'll remember will be the way we worked. It's the year in which working from home shifted from an occasional workplace benefit to something not just offered, but actually required by most companies. In the current environment, we wanted to find an expert on working from home and the future of work, and we found one. Today, we're talking to Dr John Hopkins, Innovation Fellow at Swinburne Business School at the Swinburne University of Technology. He's been published extensively, won many awards, and worked in the private sector internationally and here in Australia. Dr. John Hopkins, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean.
So how do you become an expert in working from home? Give me a bit of your background. You obviously hold a very senior position there, so just give me a bit of a flavour for your background, how you got to that job.
Yeah, sure. Look, it's probably a long and winding road, but the edited highlights would be I'm actually an engineer by trade, but from my time in academia, my main research area has been supply chain management. So I teach supply chain management to this day. About 7 years ago now, I started working on a project that was looking at traffic congestion. We were looking at ways in which we could reduce traffic congestion in Melbourne specifically, but we looked at cities around the world. And we became interested in what caused traffic congestion. And the main cause of traffic congestion is the fact that the majority of people still follow that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 pattern of work. And we started to challenge that idea. And the reason that people started to do that was to travel to their tools of work. But now we live in this digital era where a lot of the tools we have are practically in our pocket all the time. So we started looking at that, and we're working with large companies, small companies, running surveys, running focus groups. And we wanted to learn more and more about that topic and why we weren't doing it more, why more organizations weren't more flexible.
So let's think about before COVID-19, because that's a really interesting, you're sort of 7 years ahead of your time in a funny way. I'm sure it's been different in the last 6 months, but until February this year, what was the response like to it from corporate Australia?
There had been a slight increase, definitely, but even at January 2020, there was still only around 30% of what we call knowledge workers, so those people whose jobs are predominantly spent in front of a computer in an office, in a city centre office. Only around about 30% did it on a regular basis. Only around 30% of people work from home at least once a week. So that means 70% really didn't do it at all. And over the sort of 7 years we've been looking at it, that was only slightly higher than it was, say, back in 2014.
Wow. How do you judge this? What's the data you use?
Oh, look, so we looked at surveys. That's the main thing. So we started looking at surveys of Melbourne office workers, and we were asking them questions regarding their commute, what their postcode was and where they worked. So we're interested in the commuting side of it and the public transport side of it, but we're also interested in the nature of the work that they did and what percentage of their work could actually be done anywhere. So why were they traveling an hour into work to sit in front of a computer all day and then travel an hour back? And the main resistance to it was quite often the organisation wanted them there.
Yeah, right. And were there some sectors that were much more likely to work from home, though?
Some sectors, definitely. I mean, we looked at some of the banks, for instance, seemed to be more flexible. So in terms of the finance sector, we saw a greater deal of flexibility there. But across the board, it was still really low numbers.
In a COVID-19 world, it's almost unusual to think back that 6 months ago, we all felt we had to go into work. It's kind of clear what the changes have been. Everyone's working from home. But what do you think the longer term changes might be as a result of COVID-19?
Obviously, COVID-19 has been a huge catalyst for working from home, mainly because people just could not go into the office anymore. So they were forced due to a pandemic to go home and work from home instead. And quite often they were underprepared for that because it came at very short notice, and a lot of these people hadn't had any training before. So they've really kind of been fumbling their way along. And I should say at this point as well that working from home during COVID-19 is not normal working from home. And quite often the lines seem to become blurred because for that majority of people, that 70% of people who never worked from home previously, this is the only experience of working from home that they've ever had. So they think working from home is working from home with the kids there, doing homeschooling, and then only being able to go out for 1 hour a day and the curfew being on. So that is not normal working from home. But I think what the big shift that will occur in the future, according to our research, is we don't see a huge number of people moving from spending 100% of the time in their office to being 100% remote, although that will happen. But we see the real big shift being those people who never worked from home previously, working from home maybe 1 or 2 days a week, or even the boundaries of days becoming more fluid. So rather than saying, oh, I work home on a Wednesday, maybe you work home part of the day and you have a teleconference in the morning at home, you travel to the office for, say, 11 o'clock meeting, then travel at home and do the rest of your day at home.
So sort of going back to your original research, what's that mean for traffic patterns? What's that mean for how society operates?
There's huge implications for that. Obviously, there's benefits for the individual in terms of work-life balance. There's definitely advantages as well for the employer. So in terms of accessing talent and retention of staff, but also more wider implications for society and for the environment. So we mentioned public transport. So for instance, public transport works around those peaks like everything else. So people not traveling inside those peaks will definitely call into question some projects that are already underway or in the pipeline that was really based on data that was expecting an increase in commuters going forward, not a significant reduction.
So potentially infrastructure spend and all that will have to be rethought.
Yeah, look, and governments all around the world are already doing that. As I mentioned, the data that they've used to project these projects is on an increasing population, and population is going to continue to increase, but also on increasing demand. And all of a sudden, demand is dropping. Now, I'm not saying that these projects necessarily don't have to be done, but there's less urgency to have them done. So maybe they don't necessarily have to start today. They can be offset and start again in the future.
So bringing you back home, I've been working from home now since late February, really. And to be honest, I'm almost over it. I love it. There's a fantastic part of it, but I miss the camaraderie of my workmates. I miss the idea of getting dressed well, going in, having a routine in town, that type of thing. Are there any trends you're seeing as far as how people are handling it? In Melbourne, obviously, is a lot worse than anywhere else in the country. And kind of any tips, how do we keep withstanding it? Because it's going to happen for the rest of the year, presumably.
Yeah, look, it is a challenge. And, I reinforce what I said earlier in that, this isn't normal working from home. This is self-isolating during a pandemic and still trying to get your job done. So it is pretty challenging. But what I would say to anybody working from home is the number one thing you should do is take care of yourself. So one thing that can tend to happen for people working from home is that they work longer hours so they can face burnout. So remember to look after yourself, take regular breaks. So use those breaks wisely. So break away from screen time, get some fresh air, stretch your legs out, because, nobody, at the end of the day, burnout's not going to benefit anybody. It's certainly not going to benefit the individual, and it's not going to benefit the organization.
So if you had a crystal ball and you were thinking about where we're going to be in 12 months or maybe 2 years, people will be working from home to some extent. You've said that this isn't a typical work from home situation. What is a more likely scenario in terms of working from home, how people are managing themselves?
Yeah, look, I think in the future, what we're going to see is a more of a hybrid model. So all those benefits of people being together in the office, we don't want to lose that. We still do want people to come together. But at the same time, we don't necessarily want people traveling in and an hour out to sit in front of the computer, writing emails and developing presentations all day either. So I think that the future will have a much more blended and much more flexible approach. And people will spend, say, 40 to 60% of the time at home and 40 to 60% of the time at the office. And the other thing to mention as part of the equation as well is that working remotely is not always working from home. And maybe there's an opportunity for people to work closer to their home at hubs and other workplace stations like that.
Do you get a sense that people are more or less productive when they work from home?
The data that we've seen is actually quite worrying in that our data says that people are more productive working from home during COVID-19, but they're also working significantly longer hours. Yeah. So it's good that productivity is up, but it's not good that people are working much longer hours, because that isn't sustainable in the long term.
So you're Melbourne-based, so you have to work from home. What would be your preference? Because you have a very traditionally face-to-face style job.
From an academics perspective, we have a pretty flexible job anyway, but I do certainly miss that face-to-face time in the classroom. So I really enjoy, my lectures and being physically with the students. But at the moment, everything has to run online, and some things actually probably work a little bit better online, but I would say most things work better face-to-face. But I think what we're seeing at the moment is a short-term solution. But more long-term, what might happen is more of a blended approach for education as well. So we'll still have those face-to-face classes, but we may do some more blended stuff where we work online as well.
Your work is very practical, supply chain through to work from home. Do you work closely with businesses? I mean, is there much engagement between academics and business in your area?
Oh, yes. So, Swinburne, it's one area that we are one of the leaders at is industry engagement. Just for an example, so this week we just signed up with Officeworks. So Officeworks are going to provide our students with final year projects for the next 2 years. And those kind of partnerships are invaluable because what it does, it gives our students the opportunity to work on a real life project with real life people. So they get a mentor from the company as well. So that's the most authentic experience that a student could possibly have. You're working with real people on a real project. It's not just something on campus.
What's an example of a project that might come up?
Yeah, so anything to do with maybe something to do with process improvement. So you might say, well, this is a map of the organization. This is the way that we do it now. So this is the as-is process. Here's some data around what's happening. How can you improve it? And the students at our course, they all do subjects like big data analytics, and they're able to then use that data to create models and visualization and then suggest recommendations of some alternate paths and some alternate solutions to the problem.
Wow, very practical. Now, John, you're talking about it. Are you looking after yourself?
To a certain extent, I do practice what I preach, but I do have to remind myself on a daily basis or an hourly basis that I should be taking these breaks that I'm reminding everybody else to do. I'm also homeschooling, so I can really appreciate what other homeschoolers are going through at the moment. And I think we're all going to be a lot more thankful to teachers in the future when the kids finally return to school. But yeah, look, it's very important. And particularly at the moment where, we can't go on holidays. And, in Victoria, we can't even go to another state. We can't even go out to a restaurant or go and watch a movie. So it's important to do what we can and try and have breaks. And in which case, like many people, I suppose, Netflix and Uber Eats have been good friends of mine over the last 6 months.
I know what you're talking about. John, thanks for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thank you, Sean.
That was Dr John Hopkins, Innovation Fellow for Swinburne Business School at the Swinburne University of Technology.